Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I interview David Pepose, the writer of Scout's Honor by Aftershock Comics. Now let's get started. Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. I'm here with writer David Peposo. Did I pronounce that correctly?
David Pepose, but you know what? It is a choose-your-own-adventure last name, and I've heard every possible permutation, so it is no worries whatsoever.
Let me try this again. I'm here with David Pepose. Is that correct?
There you go.
Yes, okay. The writer of Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, and also I know you recently had your Kickstarter, the OZ, and also the recently released Scout's Honor. So, David, welcome to Comics for Fun and Profit. Thank you very much for being literally our first interview for Comics for Fun and Profit. Thank you very much.
What an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to blaze this trail with you. And I'm so excited to be here. I'm thrilled to talk about Scout's Honor, my recent Kickstarter, the OZ, even going back to my breakout book, Spencer and Locke. I'm happy to dig into it with you.
Thank you very much. Couple things I just want to, first off, I want to just be a fanboy real quickly. If I remember correctly, I think Spencer and Locke came out 4 years ago about there.
Just about. It came out, I believe, it was April or May of 2017.
Because I remember reading in the comic shop newspapers the article about Spencer and Locke, and I'm going, oh my God, this sounds so great. A riff on Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah. The only thing was that some of the local shops here in Hawaii, it's mostly the main two, DC, Marvel, Image, right. And then I just automatically assumed they would order Spencer and Locke from Action Lab, but we never got it, and 4 years later, now I'm talking to you, the writer of this series, the miniseries. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Tell your shop if they missed out on Spencer and Locke, tell them to order extra heavy on Scout's Honor to make up for it. That'll help me out in a big way.
Okay, that I will. And then one more thing, I want to say a big mahalo to you. Thank you very much. Couple weeks ago on Twitter, when Comics for Fun and Profit, the brothers Drew and Kyle, they picked one of your books as a spec pick of their week. You reached out to them to say, hey, I'm available for an interview. Let me know. So thank you very much for reaching out to us. Thank you very much.
It's taken a real village of retailers and readers and journalists, and I would not be where I am today without that kind of army of support. And so I never get tired of doing publicity. I never get tired of chatting about the books. And it's my pleasure to be here. I'm as somebody who has been on both sides of the publicity and journalism table. This is fun for me, so I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna start off with basically. I just want to start off with your origin story. Like, where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Mm-hmm. I was raised in the Midwest. And yeah, I'm a third generation comics reader. My mother was a comics reader. My grandfather was a comics reader. So I came by it honestly. I kind of came of age in the 90s. So things like Eric Larson's Spider-Man, the Infinity War, down to crossovers like Fatal Attractions, Nightfall, The Death and Return of Superman. That's kind of what I grew up in. Mm-hmm. And my career path, how I kind of got into comics, was a little bit of a zigzag. I worked as a journalist when I got out of college, but I had long wanted to do something creative.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I actually interned at DC Comics when I graduated college. I worked there the summer of 2008. Okay. And for those who don't know what was going on then, there was Batman R.I.P., which will be important later on in the story. Final Crisis, Green Lantern, Secret Origin, and also the 2008 financial recession.
Yes.
And so there were no jobs available at DC at the time. And to be honest, there weren't really a whole lot of jobs anywhere.
Yes.
And I lucked out in that an assistant editor at DC, Janelle Aslan, who was the assistant editor on the Batman line.
Mm-hmm.
She had graduated from the industry news site Newsarama.
Oh,
And
okay.
so she connected me with her former editor, Troy Brownfield, who's really kind of been my mentor over the last 13 years. And so I wound up writing at Newsarama. I kind of moonlit there while I worked a day job as a crime and politics reporter for the Berkshire Eagle in Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Oh.
And so it was really kind of 24/7 writing. I wound up becoming the reviews editor at Newsarama.
Yes.
I wound up reading a lot of other people's work, kind of synthesizing their voices and kind of learning from their mistakes and figuring out which tools in their toolbox I kind of wanted to use my own. And at the same time, I was feeling a little restless. I wound up going back to school. I went to Columbia University for their publishing program. Of course, I somehow kind of tripped and fell out of that into a job in television. I applied for an editorial position at Simon & Schuster. I was told that they had to kind of cut that position short due to budget cuts. But I guess they liked me enough in the interview that they passed me along to their parent company, CBS. And so I wound up working in publicity and PR for CBS for about 5 years. And it was really, a really wonderful learning experience, kind of figuring out the ins and outs of a successful TV show beyond just what's sort of written down on the page or what's shown on screen. And sort of the different ways that CBS was competitive in the way that they would promote their work, the way that they would figure out who's up, who are they going up against in terms of time slot? What are they leading the show into? Let's have something more established that you can, keep people on the hook for your new stuff.
Yes.
It was really instructive for me. At the time, though, I was still feeling pretty restless. At that point, I had started writing some short scripts just to see if I could do it.
Yes.
And finally, I kind of got up the gumption I was like, all right, maybe I've written a bunch of shorts. Maybe I'll try writing a single issue. And I really liked that single issue. And so I said, maybe I'll write an outline. And I wrote an outline for a whole series. And I said, I really like that. Maybe I'll find an artist just for fun, see how it goes. And then maybe I'll pitch it around and see what happens. And if you haven't connected the dots yet, that was Spencer and Locke.
Okay.
And I remember Dave Dwanch, who was the submissions editor at the time at Action Lab, and he's sort of become another mentor to me. I emailed them, and about 20 minutes later, got a response saying, "How soon do you think you could finish this book?" And that's a one in a million that will never happen to me again.
Yes.
But yeah, suddenly I kind of had this cold chill run down my spine that I guess I got to finish this book.
Yes.
And I've been doing it ever since. Now I live in Los Angeles. I moved out here at the time thinking maybe I would work in television development. I worked as an assistant. It was the hardest job I've ever done. The most thankless job I've ever done. And at the time, Spencer and Locke was coming out, and we were getting great reviews. And sometimes the universe kind of tries speaking to you, and sometimes you just need to listen.
Yes.
And that was like a big moment where I said, oh, maybe I'm good at this. Maybe I could do this. And so I've been writing comics ever since. But yeah, I feel like this has very much felt like kind of a leap of faith rewarded in a lot of ways. This has been my astronaut job. It's the best job in the world. It's a job that I can really eat, sleep, and dream. And so yeah, it means that I'm constantly taking a lot of swings because I write every single book like it's my last.
Oh, that's pretty good. Before we continue again, can you tell them, because I know what Spencer and Locke is, can you just, for any new listeners or new readers?
Yes. No, please. I'll take any opportunity to promote my other work.
Yeah.
For those who haven't read Spencer and Locke, it is the best way to describe it is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? It's the story of hard-boiled detective Locke, who has to solve the murder of his childhood sweetheart with an unexpected partner, his 7-foot-tall imaginary blue panther named Spencer. And the story is very much, it's not just sort of a hard-boiled noir, but it's a really kind of a look at childhood trauma and mental illness
Yeah.
and kind of the lengths your mind will go to protect itself from harm. And so we've come out with 2 volumes of Spencer and Locke, and we're hard at work on the 3rd one. Both of those volumes were nominated for Ringo Awards. They're sort of I would say they're like the Emmys of the comics industry, alongside the Eisner's Oscars. So yeah, that was sort of my breakout book. People seemed to really enjoy that. And so after our first volume, we decided to kind of spin off all of the comic strips. And so Spencer and Locke 2, we did Spencer and Locke versus Roach Riley. It was kind of our homicidal riff on Mort Walker's Beetle Bailey. And so I had described that book as kind of Taxi Driver meets The Dark Knight. And I'm really thrilled with that sequel. It's part of the reason why Volume 3 is taking as long as it is, because I want to make sure that we really like put in the work and the research. We're doing a Garfield-themed serial killer picking off the Peanuts gang for Volume 3. And without spoiling anything for people who haven't read the 2nd volume, there was certainly some fallout at the end of our 2nd volume. And so Spencer and Locke are going to have to really kind of put the pieces of their lives back together for this one last big case. So I'm really thrilled with it. My artist and co-creator George Santiago Jr. This was our big debut book for the both of us. He and I are ride or die. We actually just finished another project together while he's been waiting for me to finish writing Spencer and Locke 3. So yeah. That was those were my first books at Action Lab Entertainment. And that sort of spun off into my most recent book over there, which was a book called Going to the Chapel. And that was very much a very different kind of experience from something I've written before. It was sort of a crime heist rom-com. And I've described it as Die Hard meets Wedding Crashers. It's the story of the world's worst wedding, and that's before the bank robbers show up. Emily Anderson is a wealthy heiress and a bride with cold feet. And before she can say anything, her wedding is hijacked by a group of bank robbers known as the Bad Elvis Gang.
I read the first issue last night.
It's a fun book. It's very much, it's got a little bit of Arrested Development in there, a little bit of Ocean's 11. And yeah, that book, I had a lot of people tell me that book couldn't be done, that book couldn't sell. It sold really well. We even got some praise from Patton Oswalt, we share a local comic shop. They happen to say they slipped him a copy saying you might like this, and he wound up becoming a huge supporter of the book. He was tweeting about us every single issue. Just a really huge amount of support that I've told him that I'm very grateful for it, because somebody with millions of Twitter followers does not need to be tweeting about my book, so I'm always grateful about that.
That's nice.
Yeah, and so that kind of that led right until the current pandemic. And like we were talking about before we started recording, I was scheduled for 15 conventions last year. I managed to go to 2, Long Beach and C2E2. The trade paperback for Going to the Chapel had just been released about a month before everything locked down. And so as a result, I had just signed the contract for Scouts Honor. I had been working on that, but I had another project that had been long gestating called the OZ. And that was, I had likened it to The Hurt Locker meets The Wizard of Oz. It's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who is a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. She's come home back to Kansas to take care of her ailing grandmother. But she's very much struggling with coming back home. And one night, a tornado hits. And suddenly this new Dorothy finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And we find out that because her grandmother killed the Wicked Witch and that split, it just caused a power vacuum. And so Oz is looking a lot like Baghdad right now. At the time, I had 2 issues done of that series. I had the whole thing written. But, Diamond distributors, they had their shutdown. There were a lot of publishers that were suddenly kind of really constricting their submissions process.
Yes.
And as somebody who has, has had a lot of friends with a lot of success on Kickstarter, I've been wanting to do a Kickstarter for a long time. And I realized that I could kind of solve one problem with another, that I could find a home for the OZ, and I could introduce myself to the Kickstarter community with really some of my A game.
Yes.
And so I launched my Kickstarter for the OZ, I believe it was in August of last year. And I was so blown away by the success. We wound up actually with our backer kit funds in the back end, we actually wound up topping $50,000 for our first issue. And so we're hard at work on part 2 right now. We're about halfway finished with the art on it right now.
Okay.
So we're looking to launch that, I believe, another campaign in March.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, and then that kind of brings us to the reason you wanted to talk to me, which is my new book, Scout's Honor, through Aftershock Comics. And
David, I want to ask if we could just stop before we go into Scout's Honor. Can I just go back to Spencer and Locke?
Let's do it.
Couple things I just wanted to mention was, can you promote your website? Because it's going to tie into Spencer and Locke.
Sure. Well, you can you can follow, you can go to davidpepose.com, and that's my author website, and it's got information on Spencer and Locke. You can also visit the OZ's backer kit page, which is sort of a working web store right now. I'm debugging my web store at the moment, so don't buy anything straight from the website. Okay. But you can go to davidpepose.com. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, either through my website or at bit.ly/pepnews.
The other thing, because the reason I'm going to bring that up, because your newsletter has a free digital copy of Spencer and Locke issue number 1.
Yes. Yes. And I've been doing that. I want people who don't know who I am to know who I am. And I want them to see what I can do. And I feel like Spencer and Locke has always been the most effective calling card that I've had. It really sums up very much my voice and who I am as a writer in the span of 22 pages. And so, we did the same thing with our Kickstarter for the OZ, is that we had any backer got the first issue of Spencer and Locke and Go Into the Chapel, just to sort of let people know that I've got range and show people what I have in store. So if you don't know who I am and you want to check out what I can do, also if you're a Comixology Unlimited reader, you can also read the entire first volume of Spencer and Locke for free. Check that out. If you have, I believe if you have Amazon Prime, you're a Comixology Unlimited subscriber. So it's really like a win-win, especially this year. So yes, definitely check it out because especially if you have Amazon Prime, it's you're not spending any money, so you might as well check it out.
The only reason why I pointed your newsletter out, because I was so thrilled to see that because I signed up for, if I remember correctly, I think I signed up for your newsletter because I got the digital copy, the free digital copy of Spencer and Locke, and I just want to say that. I read it and it was like, wow, this is great.
Thank you.
There is one scene, and I loved it, where Locke is going, this city is bad, it's cursed. But then you go into a little bit more details of, it's like, the water is poison. You really describe.
Thank you.
You really describe, where he lives. You could really describe it in detail compared to, let's say, when I read, because I remember reading like old Batman,
right.
I'm kind of old. Batman issues like Crime Alley. There's no hope in Crime Alley.
Yep.
And that's all it is. But yet it kind of looks like any other rundown neighborhood,
I got really lucky in the way that I came up with Spencer and Locke was Daredevil, the Man Without Fear by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. was the book that made me realize as a kid, like real writers make these comics. It's not sort of done by committee. It's, it made me really think about like an author's voice. And so when I decided maybe I would make a run at making my own comic, I said, I want to do something, an homage to Frank Miller. What's the weirdest thing that I could throw up against Frank Miller? And you'll find most of my pitches start with what's the weirdest thing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought of a lot of ideas, but they all felt very gratuitous. They all felt rooted in shock value, which is
Mm-hmm.
not what I traffic in.
Mm-hmm.
Shock can get your foot in the door once. It doesn't build any investment emotionally with your
Mm-hmm.
readers. But when I thought of Calvin and Hobbes, the light bulb went off. This idea of a hard-boiled cop who's been beat up and he's
Yes.
grinning in the rain and he's holding a stuffed animal.
Mm-hmm.
What's that guy's upbringing like?
Mm-hmm.
What's his home life like?
Mm-hmm.
What has made him sort of cling on to this childhood security for so long?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, why would Calvin have to so vividly imagine a best friend?
Yes.
I have a 9-year age gap between me and my younger siblings. So I remember being an only child, and
Mm-hmm.
I did not have imaginary friends. Like, I just made normal friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of maybe this isn't a charming quirk, but something like a more sinister pathology,
Mm-hmm.
that's there's the emotional core to that.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to my point is that by tapping into that sort of Frank Miller homage,
Yes.
hard-boiled, Keith Spillane, noir voice,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to take a little bit more liberties. You're able to be a little bit more purple with the prose.
Yes.
You're able to be a little bit more descriptive with it. And I think for a first-time writer,
Mm-hmm.
that was a real blessing. That sort of gave me, I think, a little bit of extra wiggle room
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the way that this book was received. Whereas there's other genres where I think you have to be a little tighter with everything, and you can't be as indulgent with some
Mm-hmm.
of the imagery. But I love being indulgent with imagery. And so as a result, writing that kind of noir, that third person or that first person perspective, that has been, that was a real gift for
Mm-hmm.
me as a first time writer. And since I've written more books since then, I've come to realize that, like, doing narrative captions, it's double-edged. It gives you an extra depth to your story, which is good. Comics only have a limited amount of real estate, so
Mm-hmm.
any extra layers you can do are great. But the downside is that means you are essentially writing the book again. You're not just doing the plot panel to panel, and you're not just doing the dialogue panel to panel, but you also now have to have sort of this extra track layered onto it of what's the character thinking in any particular moment, and is this something that he's reacting to that's right in front of his face, or is he more of sort of pulling back in the exposition?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenging process.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly one that is still evolving for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I having written now with narration and without narration, of course, writing without narration goes faster for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it has its own challenges. And so, but yeah, thank you for commenting on the imagery, because especially for that first issue, I can still remember what it was like,
Mm-hmm.
this being the first thing that I had ever written, and kind of knowing
Yes.
there's something here.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, that really kind of gave me the momentum and the excitement to
Mm-hmm.
bring that series across the finish line. And that changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
It really opened a lot of doors for me. And so I'll always see that book as my baby. It was my firstborn, and I'll always be proud of it.
Yeah, it's the first issue, and I'm ordering the trade through my local comic shop, Dragon's Lairs. So I'm waiting for the trade, then I can read the whole, whole miniseries. All right, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, because we are going to get into your latest book, Scout's Honor. Now, before I want to ask this question, Drew from Comics for Fun and Profit asked, were you a scout, and what is the inspiration for Scout's Honor?
Yeah, it's a great question that I can answer at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
which is my brothers were scouts. My younger brothers were scouts. I was not. Because I was the firstborn, I think my parents didn't quite have their act together with me. Whereas by the time my siblings were born, my younger siblings are triplets, and so I think anything that could give them structure, any extracurriculars they could throw in was very helpful. So my younger brothers were both scouts for a short period of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that was the initial kernel that made Scouts Honor, is being the outside, being on the outside looking in. because
Oh.
when you're the inside on the Scouts, it's about camaraderie and it's about the practical skills and it's about time with your boys, and maybe sometimes there's a little rivalry going on, but it's about the structure of it all and finding that direction and that meaning. But in the outside, you see the pageantry and you see the costumes and you see the laws, and you don't have to squint that much to sort of think like this could turn into a cult.
Yes.
And when I pitched this book to Aftershock, this book has been very different in terms of development than anything I've ever worked on. A lot of places like an Action Lab or an Image, for example, it's very binary. They want you to have your team together. They want you to written an issue, come up with the whole outline, and then you pitch your thing. And it's very thumbs up, thumbs down, yes, no. But places like Aftershock or Boom, they want to be more hands-on, and they want to help you with the development. They want to sort of help bring. They want to sort of take your vision and their vision and kind of turn it into something else. And so I've been pitching Aftershock for a long time. The reason why I'd said earlier about my story about Batman R.I.P. being so important is the editor on that book was Mike Martz, who is now one of my editors on Scout's Honor. And so I've known Mike, for a very long time. And so I've wanted to work with Aftershock for a long time based on the great experience I had with Mike at DC. And I had pitched them a number of ideas, and Scout's Honor was really the one that they really latched onto. And so I started developing it, and there were a lot of different iterations to that, and different twists and layers to the plot were added on with every new iteration. But what I think was interesting about that book is they, I think, recognized how prescient it was before even I did. And so, things like kind of the culture of toxic masculinity that we all have to navigate, and sort of the fetishizing of the military and survival prepping, things like sort of the rise of this kind of evangelical thinking. You put that in a cauldron, for 200 years, you throw a couple nuclear warheads at it. Suddenly the Ranger Scouts don't seem, that far-fetched. And, there was a point to all this, and clearly I've been talking enough that I don't necessarily remember what I was trying to say. But I feel like, I remember where I was at now. Which is the way that this kind of, the kernel of this idea and how it came to be, to answer Drew's question. I've been watching a show called The Path. It's on Hulu. It's terrific. A lot of people slept on it, starring Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad.
Yes.
But the story is about a Scientology-style cult, and what happens to Aaron Paul's character when he tries to leave the cult. What happens to him? What happens to his family? What happens to kind of the second in command of this cult, who's really been kind of steering everything behind the scenes because their L. Ron Hubbard figure is on his deathbed. And I loved that show, because yes, there are people who are at loggerheads with each other, but there are no really like outright villains. The sort of the belief structure, they're on opposite ends of the same belief structure, and that's what causes the conflict. And I had thought to myself, what's the weirdest thing that I could use as a Bible?
Yes.
And the idea of the Boy Scout manual, that clicked for me. The thing that really kind of surprised me, though, as I dug into this book and as I really started fleshing it out in the characters, I didn't realize how autobiographical it was going to be. We talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I grew up in a pretty conservative upbringing. Pretty conservative house, both politically and religiously. I'm a practicing Jew, and that my political and religious reawakening, my spiritual reawakening, really didn't happen until I left home.
Yes.
And I suddenly realized that there were so many things that I had taken as gospel, all these pillars that I had believed in. I suddenly found out, that's not really accurate. The way I was told is not actually how the world is working.
Yeah.
And it was really disorienting for me. I really had to kind of figure out, how do I re-navigate the world and still stay true to my ethical values and spiritual values, but kind of reorienting and recalibrating. And so much of that is, I think, represented in Kit's journey in Scout's Honor. Without spoiling too much about the book, it is the story. It's of a post-apocalyptic cult that have risen from the ashes of a nuclear war,
Mm-hmm.
and their Bible is an old Ranger Scout manual.
Mm-hmm.
And so we jump ahead over 200 years, and we see how this cult has developed.
Mm-hmm.
And Kit is our protagonist and is really kind of the embodiment of all the good things about the Ranger Scouts of America as they've tried to take back the irradiated Colorado Badlands.
Mm-hmm.
There's just one twist. This is a sort of a hyper masculine patriarchal society that only allows men to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kit has had to conceal her identity as a woman
Mm-hmm.
in order to pursue her true calling as a Ranger Scout.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a true believer. And that's going to make it all that much harder when she makes a really horrifying discovery that cuts back all the way to the Ranger Scouts creation.
Yes.
So she's going to find herself losing her religion
Mm-hmm.
as she really embarks on a very dangerous quest for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was really interesting that, it's not like this is a book about a supervillain. This is a book about secrets
Mm-hmm.
and sort of, how blinding the truth can be when you sort of rip the veil off. And where do you go from there?
Mm-hmm.
There are some bells that can't be unrung.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that can't be unseen. And, as we sort of go through this journey, Kit is going to kind of go through those 5 stages of kind of, of sort of, did I see what I thought I saw?
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of going through a quest, well, I have to verify this. And the dangers become twofold. It's not just the apocalypse. It's not just the radiation and the monsters and the raiders outside the compound.
Mm-hmm.
But Kit is going to have to find herself starting to navigate the people that she's grown up to love and trust the most.
Mm-hmm.
And that really spoke to me, because when you strip it all down, this is the story of kids in a small conservative town and what happens when you don't fit those rigid gender roles.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of how do you navigate
Mm-hmm.
the world? And so yeah, I think it's been a really rewarding story to work on.
Yeah.
The world building has been so much fun, kind of building up the apocalypse and seeing how the Boy Scout imagery fits in, and also finding the religion in all of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlike anything I've written before.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fun companion piece to my work on the OZ, but they're very different books.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I struggle to think of another book on the stands that's quite like it.
Yeah. I read the first issue on Comixology. My LCS was, I'm sorry, I'm kind of digressing. My LCS didn't get their shipment. I don't know why.
I've heard that once you leave the continental U.S. that there's been like shipping delays all over the place. So I totally get it.
No, it was the Highwaymen that took your books. No, I'm teasing. Because the Highwaymen are the raiders in your books, right?
Yes. And they will have, they're there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing sort of, there are 2 sides to every story.
Yes.
That winds up becoming, I think, a big through line through this book.
Okay. But I'm sorry. So I'm going back again. So, I read the first issue. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but, it's like I really love it. It's really great. I just wanted to go over I just wanted to ask a couple questions because when I saw the image of Kit,
mm-hmm.
Did you guys, to me, Kit almost looked like an Archie Andrews character.
Sure. So much. I remember talking with my artist on the book, Luca Casalinguida,
mm-hmm.
and talking with my editors, Christina Harrington and Mike Barnes. Something that I wanted to make sure that Kit was kind of an androgynous figure.
Oh, yes.
Somebody like, Kristen Stewart was one of the names that I threw out there when,
mm-hmm.
we were designing the character. And some of it, I tend to lean towards redheads in my books, and I'll admit some of that is a cheat because you get to see from a distance, exactly who it is.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting about Kit to me as a character is the idea of her being a woman
mm-hmm.
came fairly late in the development process.
Mm-hmm.
When it was something I sprung on Aftershock in the initial outline, and I think that's the reason why they went for it.
Mm-hmm.
That was not something I talked about in the original log lines that I pitched them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was me solving one problem with another, which is something I like to do. In that I came up with this idea, and Aftershock loved it, and then I immediately realized, oh, geez, like it's 2019. How am I going to do a book that's all dudes?
Yes.
You know, um, and I thought, that like that just feels a little tone deaf given the market right now.
Yes.
And then I realized, like, okay, like let's lean into that. Like, what happens when you're the one woman in this sort of hyper masculine cult?
Yes.
And it wound up having, I think, a lot of dramatic friction, because every move that Kit makes, she has to have her guard up. She can't let things slip. There's only one person who knows her secret. It's her dad.
Yes.
Even her best friend, Des, doesn't know this about her.
Yes.
And that's tragic, and so, yeah, the way that Luca really kind of realized her, I was so thrilled. Luca is just a top tier artist. You might know him from his work on James Bond or Lost Soldiers over at Image. When Mike and Christina told me that Luca was available, I'd actually reached out to Luca years ago about another project, and he's busy with James Bond. So I was thrilled. And he's really done some incredible work with this book. And not, including the expressive-ness of Kit and Des and Scoutmaster Shepard and the other members of the book. It's a post-apocalyptic book, so you automatically think action. But I honestly think Luca might even excel more at the quiet moments.
Yes.
The moments where you see the gears turning in these characters' heads. And I feel like he really kind of, I can only imbue so much emotion in the script, without having a really talented actor of an artist be able to kind of convey that. And I think Luca has done a really terrific job. And I've been thrilled to work with him on this project. And seeing the way that he brought the Ranger Scouts world to life.
Yes.
He did a lot of the heavy lifting there. And I'm really thrilled with what he came up with.
And I'm going to say, me too, because it was, because I'm going to only touch on one more character, Scoutmaster Shepard. Yeah. The image of Scoutmaster Shepard, when I was reading and looking, I was like, oh, wow, this is, it's a little creepy, because the robe, how the robe looks, how Scoutmaster Shepard looks, it was like,
I had said, I think military Jesus, that was my direction in the script. Scoutmaster Shepard has been such a fun character, right? I mean, I guess he's the closest thing to a villain that Scouts Honor has, but he kind of isn't. Like, I mean, it's he's the political and religious leader of this cult, the survivalist cult, and there's a degree of pride to it. You don't want, you want your way of life to continue, but in the apocalypse, like, these survival skills become very crucial. And so there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders. He sort of sees himself as the last bulwark between, civilization and oblivion. And so I get why he's so harsh, and why he perpetuates this structure that, might be a little corrupt, because he thinks that the ends absolutely justify the means. And seeing his dynamic with his son Des is kind of one of my favorite parts of the book, because Kit's the big picture thinker in terms of her journey. And, once she's on the track, there's really kind of, she's on the track. Whereas Des is kind of the Loki to Kit's Thor. He's always coming in second best. And as the son of the Scoutmaster, he's got scrutiny on top of scrutiny. And this is a mild spoiler for issue 2. We'll get into it more there. But one of the reasons I wanted to introduce Des was I had thought, if life is hard for a woman in this society, how hard would it be for somebody in the LGBTQ community? And so when you boil him down, he's the closeted son of the pastor. And that's a hard way to live your life. And I think the tragedy of Kit and Des's relationship is that they are lifelong best friends who each don't know a crucial secret about the other. And that is going to kind of that's going to make their friendship curdle, and it's going to spiral into a pretty bitter rivalry that'll play out over the course of this issue or this series. And I think Kit and Des and sort of their dynamic with Shepard and their dynamic with their religion and their religious figure, that becomes the backbone of this book. And really kind of, I think, gives a human set of personal stakes to this sort of otherwise kind of highfalutin spiritual quandary that Kit finds herself in. Because, that's the difference. It's not academic to them. This is their life. This is their culture. And how do but at the same time, these are people that are sort of stifling themselves and being really kind of suffocated because they have to keep who they are secret. And that's something I think a lot of people can relate to. I think no matter who you are, and in, whatever, you could be a straight white cis guy, and there's still living authentically is hard to do.
Yes.
There are a lot of pressures and expectations that are put on everybody. And so it's hard to even sometimes articulate who you really are and what you really want, let alone living it. And so I think that's an ongoing struggle for a lot of people. And so being able to dive into that and really drill into that with my characters was a particularly rewarding process.
I have, let's see, 2 things I wanted to follow up with Scout's Honor. Scoutmaster Shepard. Was that an intentional name that you wanted, or was it,
Yeah. Because I mean, first off, obviously, having the Scoutmaster handle was very important, just to the iconography of the Scouts. But yeah, Shepard, was, yes, it was very much sort of, it's you think of the messianic imagery, you think, of the leadership imagery. It felt like the perfect name for him. Okay. I will say, though, that wound up causing some complications down the line when I was developing the script. Originally, so Dez, that was the character's third name, because I realized very quickly that I can't call him Dax Shepard, who is an actual human being, or even Dex Shepard. I was like, oh, I gotta change that. I want to say that the book had already been approved, and I had already turned in my first issue script, and then I realized, like, oh, I can't. Dax. I think my girlfriend saw it, and she's like, "Isn't Dax Shepard a person?" And I was like, but yeah, the name was fully intentional. I get in my own head a lot about character names. I've said that I spend a lot of time on baby name websites and popular surnames, because constantly like what fits together. It's like thesauruses for it's pun sites. I'm very much a stickler for what the characters' names are and what's the title of the book, because I feel like if I don't have it, it doesn't click. And I know that's like very fussy and precious, but like I can be kind of as spontaneous with the plotting as I need to be, but if the names don't sound right. So yeah, I thought long and hard about what I was going to call these characters and sort of what that might represent in terms of imagery. Even Kit's father, Glenn, the idea of sort of like, well, what's some like kind of forest imagery that I can put out there for this book about Boy Scouts, even in Apocalypse. So it was definitely it was quite intentional.
Okay. And the second thing I want to touch upon, Scout's Honor, is the incredible back matter.
Thank you.
I was reading that, and it's Scoutmaster Shepard's going, "This is our badge. This is the," and he writes where this is where Kit excels. This is where my son,
Thank you for saying that. It's one of those things. I'm usually not a big believer in back matter, because honestly, like, how often can you say that you've read back matter that's like interesting and like worth the money? But this was a confluence of a lot of cool stuff coming together at once. Some of this was Aftershock's head of marketing, Steve Rotterdam. I've known Steve for a long time. He was at DC when I was at DC. And I think he and Mike, along with the company president, Lee Kramer, they really, all three of them together kind of went for a full court push to getting a book with me out the door. And Steve, when I had pitched this idea to him,
Mm-hmm.
he said, well, we got to do merit badges. And I was like, oh yeah, way ahead of you, because
Mm-hmm.
the idea of the merit badges being seen as a little bit of communion, but also having this military element of saying, I know the skills of my platoon just by
Yes.
looking at them. It all felt really cool. And so Steve and the Aftershock crew, we were talking for a while about, okay, we want to offer store incentives. We want to
Yes.
offer merit badges for any store that orders 20 or more copies.
Yeah.
So we actually have 14 merit badges. We have merit badges for each of the various covers that we're doing. So meanwhile, Aftershock usually does back matter on the books. And so it felt like a win-win that I was like, okay, let's explain all of these merit badges. And the cool thing was that was actually the last part of Scouts Honor that I wrote. I'd already written all 5 issues. They'd already been turned in. Luca, I had drawn all of it. I mean, and so it was a great way for me to sort of look back on the whole series and then feed in some of the foreshadowing, and also a way to say, okay, I know what's on the page as far as this book is concerned, but are there other layers that I can add to it? What's the religion of it all? And so things like, for example, the explosives merit badge, which is kind of my favorite of all the merit badges, because they say the world was born in an explosion.
Yes.
Sometimes that means overwhelming force is the only thing that can make a change. But on the other hand, these scouts are obsessed with figuring out like blast wave radii and payload composition, because they say if you don't respect the bomb, you could be the thing that gets consumed. And growing up Jewish, I think, was a really important part of this book. This book would not exist without that, because my spiritual journey is very different than that of my parents and very different than that of their parents. But Judaism as a culture, there's a wide spectrum of belief and a wide spectrum of practice, going from sort of secular cultural Jews to Reform Jews to conservative to the Orthodox to the Hasidic community. It's a religion built on literary criticism. You have 5 different rabbis analyzing the same passage, giving 10 different interpretations, and then we keep all that apocryphal material in the margins. And so finding the religion in all of the imagery was particularly fun for me. But at the same time, I was also really fortunate. My partner was raised Catholic, and she is no longer a member of the church in the wake of the priest abuse scandals. She was so disillusioned and saying, how can I be a part of an institution that has swept this stuff under the rug? And that conversation really kind of made the basis of Scouts Honor, because Kit ultimately, she wants to maintain her ethical and spiritual values, but she also has to navigate this human institution that is flawed and corrupt and has hidden its own sinister secrets. And that together, sort of my partner and I, of our own sort of spiritual conversations and our own kind of journey together. That was really kind of heartening to put that on the page. I've always long thought about Jewish culture in pop culture. And how can we get away from the Schindler's List of it all? And I feel like there are certain ways you can approach it, and where it's if not Judaism as a culture, the Jewish way of looking at things. And I feel like Scouts Honor, to me, feels like the most Jewish book I've ever written in that regard. And I think the back matter was something that really solidified that. That was my way of kind of solidifying the Ranger Scout cult and being able to codify it beyond sort of the 7 Scout laws that kind of are sort of the guiding lights, their 10 commandments, so to speak. But those badges, it was a great way to foreshadow the book, but also to be like, okay, but like, what does that mean? An underwater infiltration badge, oh, well, we can tie that in to the Battle of Black Ridge, which was sort of a big Scout victory. It's just, it's fun little ways to kind of flesh out the world at a little bit more detail in a book that I think already goes really heavy on the world building. And it makes the Scout culture feel so much more vibrant and three-dimensional,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly gave me a lot of wiggle room and a lot of different directions that I could take the book.
Oh, okay. The thing I really appreciate about the back matter was it was Scoutmaster Shepard describing it. It's not like, it's not a cold hard fact. This is what, explosive badge is. And no, he's writing and explaining it. And then he's also, again, like I said, he puts his personal thoughts in, like, Kit was better, does well in this. And,
why does Des keep stealing the armored personnel carriers?
yes.
Yeah. So it's funny, like we were talking about with Spencer and Locke, how like the Frank Miller homage gave me more elbow room. That's one of the reasons I've loved writing Scoutmaster Shepard, is like he loves to speechify. Yes. And so, you're able to get a little more purple with the prose, and you're able to get a little bit more poetic because that's his job. He's a religious leader. And so, these are people who they speak in metaphor, and they want to draw up imagery in your mind. And there's something a little bit more formal in the way that he speaks.
Yes.
And that way I'm able to sort of have my cake and eat it too, because you have somebody like Kit and Des who they're very plain spoken, but you're able to, build the world and the exposition of the world a little bit through Shepard in the way that he does his speeches. And it doesn't feel out of place and it doesn't feel weird, but it's this very grandiose way of moving through the series. And I think by virtue of doing so, it builds him up a little bit as a potential threat. You know how smart he is, and you know how much he's thought this thing through. But it also, it's been like it's a nice little cheat for me as a writer, because I can say, oh, like there's something that I need to introduce, like in the script. Sure, let's do 2 pages of a speech from Scoutmaster Shepard where he very much outlines exactly why the Ranger Scouts have come together as a cult and what they believe in, and who their messiah is. So being able to really dig into that in the back matter, it kept it from being a chore, because Scoutmaster Shepard has such a unique voice to him.
Yes.
And like you said, he's got an agenda as well. He wants the Scouts to be the best of the best. And so he's sort of, on the one hand, his son, who's been kind of, a little bit of a slacker, he says, all right, let me pit him against his best friend and like see if that's the thing that sort of makes my son finally come into his own. And at the same time, he's very impressed with Kit. And that's because, Kit has passion for the job, and Kit is built for the job. And Kit, despite needing to fly under the radar, does a terrible job of flying under the radar. And so, that's gonna draw attention. And so far, Kit's been really lucky that it hasn't drawn the wrong type of attention. But she's got a couple of targets on her back at this point. And so, the getting Scoutmaster Shepard's attention is probably the worst thing that she could do right now. And unfortunately, she can't hide her light under a bushel. And so that, I think, makes it, that puts them on a collision course.
I'm going to ask 2 more questions about Scout's Honor before we move on to your future book. So Drew has a question, and it can be with any of the series, either Spencer and Locke or, Going to the Chapel or Scout's Honor. Do you write a full script?
Yes. I write, probably the closest person that I see, Tom King's scripts, I think, feel pretty similar to mine, in that we're both pretty Spartan in the details. For me, it's kind of like water skiing, like I have to kind of get from point A to point B to point C. And I really don't, I just go as quickly as I can, because if I stop and dwell on the imagery, I lose my momentum. And so, but I write full script. And then usually what I've done, and it's been a little different with Scout's Honor, but usually, I'll have a pretty in-depth conversation with my artists about like the layout and thumbnails of it all. And then, my letter will usually do a pass, and then I'll realize like, oh, this line is way too long. We got to trim it. With Scout's Honor, it was actually a lot more streamlined. It really, the process behind it felt like just as much in common with Work for Hire as it did Create Around, in that there was no time for hand-holding or long conversations. Luca was churning out an issue about every 6 weeks.
Oh, okay.
And that is a blisteringly fast speed
Mm-hmm.
for any professional artist, let alone one of his caliber.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that wound up working is I realized very quickly, oh, I gotta like kind of beef up my descriptions. I gotta start using reference art a little bit more. It certainly is maybe a little bit more of a flexible and nimble writer, and figuring out how do I measure twice and cut once.
Mm-hmm.
As in this case, I was not the central editorial conduit anymore. So
Yeah.
I could, it wasn't all coming through me. So I couldn't say like, all right, like we got to fix this, 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 and this.
Mm-hmm.
I was coordinating through my editors, and my
Mm-hmm.
editors were the ones kind of figuring out, is this a battle worth fighting? Is there a way that you can fix this in the lettering or the coloring stages?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that, yeah, I definitely write full script though.
Okay.
I know there are some people who can do the Marvel method. I'm not there yet. And I think my art teams thus far, Luke is by far the most experienced person I've ever worked with. Most of the people that I've worked with, this is their first or second book.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to make sure that I don't burn them out as well as stress me out, I try to be as deliberate as I can be and exacting with the directions, because that way it's hard enough for just to draw it and to draw it on a semi-regular deadline that I want to make sure that everybody has a script well ahead of time.
Okay. Thank you for answering that question. Last
Sure.
question about Scouts Honor is, do you want to add anything else about Scouts Honor? Anything
Sure. Well, you can. So the final order cutoff for issue 2 is going to be this coming Monday. You can pre-order issues 2 and 3 now. You can tell them to add all 5 issues to your pull list. Pre-orders, I don't have to tell you, are so important for indie books like ours. Selfishly, I want my publisher to know that I'm coming out swinging.
Yes.
I have, this is the biggest platform I've ever worked on. This is Scouts Honor #1 was the highest selling book that I've ever done, by an extremely wide margin.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can say, and hopefully Aftershock won't be mad at me, we sold more than 10,000 copies of the first issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there will be higher numbers coming.
Yes.
And so I want my publisher to know that I'm coming out swinging. I want to do more books at this level.
Mm-hmm.
And so pre-orders are huge for that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's lots of fun stuff coming, especially issue 3. If you thought the Ranger Scouts were tough, what does an Eagle Scout look like in this world? To see kind of what does it take to become an Eagle Scout in this world. But yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up with that. Luca's work has been terrific. Our colorist Matt Nilla has really kind of elevated everything to a whole new level. And our letterer Carlos Manguel has just done such a terrific job at making every page sing.
Mm-hmm.
So you really don't miss out on this book, because it's if you're a fan of Mad Max or Mulan or The Handmaid's Tale or The Hunger Games or even Planet of the Apes, you will love this book. So definitely don't miss out.
This question is not in the list that I gave you. I'm just going to throw this out there, and if you don't have a clear answer, that's fine.
Yeah.
I know you already written Scout. You've already done the miniseries. You've completed.
Yeah.
Are we going to be revisiting this world probably within the next year or two? Or is that somewhere?
Well, so I've written Scouts Honor. It's a 5-issue mini, and I'd written a distinct beginning, middle, and end. Right now, there's no plans for a sequel, but the book just came out, and at least for me, it certainly went well above expectations. If the demand is there and Aftershock wants a sequel, I always write with an idea in my back pocket.
Okay.
So right now, there's no plans, but if a lot of people start beating down the doors at Aftershock, that could change.
Okay. Right. So now we're going to move on to your next book, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, the title of it is Grand Theft Astro.
Yeah. That's been a book that's been a long time coming. We announced it through Top Cow. I believe it.
Oh, sorry. I think
summer of 2019. Sorry. Yeah, we announced that through Top Cow, I believe it was the summer of 2019.
Okay.
So it's been a long time coming. We're just coordinating on the art side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But the book is already written. I actually finished the last script shortly before quarantine.
Okay.
And so, yeah, super fun book. I've likened it to Fast and the Furious meets Back to the Future
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit of Star Wars thrown in for good measure. It's set in the future where people race spaceships for profit and pink slips. They're called Star Chasers. And Hakeem Henriksen is the fastest star chaser in the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is he has built an experimental quantum supercharger, and
Mm-hmm.
he tests it in the middle of a race. And as a result, it rips open a wormhole that throws him 7 years into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hakeem, who's used to being in first place, is now sort of stranded in a world that's long since left him behind.
Yes.
And so he's going to team up with his formerly younger brother, Omar,
Mm-hmm.
who has kind of grown up to become sort of a fearsome crime lord. And they're going to go on a faster than light heist for a piece of technology that could send Hakeem home.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a really fun book. I'm so excited for it to come out. It's my first foray into like hard sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
Scout's Honor kind of like straddles that line a little bit, but this is a super fun book, and I'm confident that it'll be worth the wait when the art is complete.
Okay.
I don't have an ETA on when that will be at this
Mm-hmm.
point. Artist Jordi Perez has been in high demand.
Mm-hmm.
Doing work over at Dynamite and Boom, and his book at Vault, Queen of Bad Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've been doing a lot of coordinating and figuring out sort of his schedule and how, him sort of chiseling away one page at a time.
Yes.
But he's been making some good progress on it. And once we've sort of gotten to a critical mass of pages, then we'll be able to kind of figure out where we stand with the
Mm-hmm.
schedule.
Yes.
But yeah, so far so good. It's been a fun book to write. It's very much a book about sort of there's a little bit of sibling rivalry in the mix, but it's really about competitiveness and how
Mm-hmm.
it can blind you.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be glib, but to think of like Ricky Bobby, where he says if you're not first, you're last.
Mm-hmm.
That is a mindset that can really blind people and can really kind of cloud your judgment. And at the same time, there's also this danger of looking back,
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Yes.
romanticizing the past,
Yes.
and maybe figuring out that the best direction to move is forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to really play with a lot of that, with a lot of sort of, if you like The Italian Job, if you like Ocean's 11, if you like
Mm-hmm.
The Furious, a lot of sort of these high speed heists.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really fun action book that's got a real beating heart to it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm thrilled with it, and I can't wait until it comes out.
Yeah, because I'm going to say I can't wait for it either, because I've listened to other interviews you've done. It's like the OZ. I'm like going, this sounds great, And like I mentioned before with Spencer and Locke, when I first read it in, Comic Shop News, it's like, oh my God, this is great. I want to read this stuff.
There's something you say, different books. They feel different when you get the green light. Scouts Honor, it was one of those things. It felt so like I was so tense every step of the way
Mm-hmm.
that by the time that the thing got greenlit, I was just like, okay, like I knew there was nothing else I could do. I had already gotten a logline approved and an outline approved in a first issue script.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I hope they take it. If not, I guess I'll put it in my back pocket. But books like Astro, books like Spencer and Locke, books like the OZ especially, there's a different feeling because it's sort of like scaling the mountaintop a bit. Like I had to assemble my whole team, and I had to finance the project, and I had to sort of be the guy calling all the shots.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really nerve-wracking. It's really anxiety-inducing. But when a reader sees it,
I'm sorry, David. Can you repeat that again?
And reviewer. I said when a reader that anxiety and dread suddenly kind of transmutes itself
Mm-hmm.
into just pure exhilaration.
Mm-hmm.
And so every book has been really special to me for different reasons. Scouts Honor felt like kind of climbing the mountain of a different sort of mountain range. It was sort of making sure that my book was good enough, not just for public consumption, but this kind of higher level of editorial oversight.
Yes.
Whereas books that I've had to sort of ringlead all on my own, it's just, oh, these are the books that nobody thought would work, and I'll make that work.
Yeah.
Spite is a very powerful motivator in the way that I write, and oftentimes rejections wind up being the thing that really galvanizes the whole effort for me. Because then I say, all right, like, I'll show you.
Yes.
And every single one of my books has had a terrible rejection attached to it. And to be honest, I think that's been my secret ingredient.
Yeah.
And even Scouts Honor, that was the result of many, many, many pitches.
Okay.
And many of them did not make it across the finish line, either for formatting reasons or for reasons that, Aftershock had another book like it, or, it wasn't the right fit.
Yeah.
And I think that made Scouts Honor going across the finish line all that much more satisfying, is because now I know I can do it. And I think that's really kind of killed the last vestige of imposter syndrome I have now, because I know I can operate at this level. I can step up to the plate, and I won't choke that.
One more question before we start looking into your future, and also other fun questions. Is there any other works you want to promote right now? Anything upcoming? Because I know we talked a little bit about some stuff.
Sure. Spencer and Locke, of course, and Spencer and Locke 2. Going to the Chapel is a book that I think flew under a lot of people's radars. The OZ, you can buy all 4 of those books on the OZ's BackerKit store, the ozcomic.backerkit.com.
Okay.
I've got some fun shorts coming out. I've got a one-shot with my Spencer and Locke collaborator, George Santiago Jr., called Roxy Rewind. It's my first dipping of the toe in the superhero genre. It's an idea I've had for a very long time. The Nightmare Theater Horror Anthology just wrapped up its Kickstarter. I'm sure there's going to be ways to buy it outside of the Kickstarter, but I did a short called Die Die Danger Ronin. It was my riff on the Power Rangers. What if the Power Rangers went head-to-head with The Walking Dead. That's a super fun short that I did with artist Erica D'Urso. I should have a short announced relatively soon with artist Chris Sheehan from the Autumnal. We worked on it during quarantine together, so it should be any month now that's getting announced. And then beyond that, I've been kind of hard at work at my own stuff. I've been gearing up for more pitches for Aftershock, but also I'm working on a couple horror pitches. I've been on a real horror bent lately. It's the one genre I haven't done a whole lot in yet. So I've got a lot of different twists on the horror genre that I'm working on right now. Working on Spencer and Locke 3, sort of slowly but surely chipping through all of the research that I have to do of reading all of Peanuts and all of Garfield on top of all of Calvin and Hobbes. It's been the right kind of busy. I've got a laundry list of at least a dozen high concepts right now. And, if I can write, on average 2 to 3 of them a year, that means that I've got another few years of work ahead of me. And that's assuming that something doesn't kind of cut the line the way that Scouts Honor did, where a publisher just, that one. And I say, oh, I've only been thinking about that idea for 2 weeks. Okay. Off to the races. But I've said this in a lot of interviews, but I want to be a 30-year man in this business. I want to be like the Grant Morrisons or the Dan Slotts who are there. They are institutions. And I feel like, create our own work is the way to do it. I would love to do licensed work. Don't get me wrong. If the big two come in, I'm happy to answer. But there's something to be said for developing your own voice as a creator, and also making sure that you don't think you can run before you can walk. The big two, and I think I've learned that a little bit with Scouts Honor, even having worked with big two editors, is it's a faster process. It can be a much more chaotic process. The communication can be challenging. And if you don't have your feet under you, that's a really easy way to screw up.
Yes.
And ultimately, I would much rather stay in the minor leagues and put out my best possible work than than have my eyes be bigger than my stomach and put out work that is not up to my standard. At the end of the day, like, and this is the worst thing to say as somebody who's like promoting a comic, sales numbers don't matter to me. Reputation does. My rep is the only thing I can bring with me from book to book.
Yeah.
And so I think I stress myself out a lot about how to make my books and how to put out the best possible work I can, even if it's not necessarily the fastest possible work. And so I think, continuing on this creator-owned path and making sure that every book I do stretches a new muscle and sort of makes me stretch myself as a creator, then I can sleep at night. The sales numbers don't matter to me. Even the reviews and the acclaim, those don't matter to me as long as I feel like I have tried something new.
Yes.
Comics. Nobody's gonna bat 1,000 in comics. If I stay in this industry long enough, the survival rate will always hit 0 at some point. I will put out a bad book someday.
Yeah.
I hope it's not tomorrow. I hope it's not next month. But I feel like I will go down swinging, and I will treat every book like it's my last one because one day it will be.
Yeah. I'm gonna say you have I don't know how to put this in better words, but you have a solid head on your shoulder. Like you said that it's the quality of the work that matters to you the most. And sorry, I'm going to brag for a little bit because when I interviewed Howard Mackey, it was a short interview. One of the things he started to joke around with was he was going, "I am not responsible for the Spider-Man clone saga." And then he said, "I hope that's not going to be on my tombstone when I die." He was joking around about it, but it was like the Spider-Man clone saga was like 30 years ago, and
yeah, it's exactly. I mean, the comics industry has a long memory.
Yeah.
And in that regard, I've been really fortunate. I mean, the fact that we're talking about Spencer and Locke, not a lot of writers still get to talk about their first work, especially in a really positive way. And the response to that book has been almost universally positive.
Yes.
But yeah, it's funny that you say I have a good head on my shoulders. I feel like my mother's an economist, and I feel like the world's worst son of an economist for being in the comics industry. But honestly, I've tried every stable job. I've worked in journalism. I worked in corporate job at CBS, and I worked as a Hollywood assistant. And I did those jobs and I learned from those jobs, but I don't know if I was built for those jobs. This is a job that I feel like I'm built for.
Yes.
It's a job that I feel like I could actually be good at.
Yes.
And there are plenty of times where comics as an entity, I'm pulling my hair out, but comics as a job, this is the best job on the planet. I get to have things up for fun and profit. Like I not only that, but I get to see the most talented person in the world drawing my ideas.
Yes.
It is the best job in the world. It's like coming into Willy Wonka's factory every day. And I try not to forget that. I think and I remember all of my old hard jobs. And don't get me wrong, comics are probably the most challenging job I've ever done.
Yes.
But it's also the most fulfilling I've ever done.
Yes.
And it feels like running a marathon every time I've done a script. But you know how good it feels when you've finished a marathon. And so that I think really kind of keeps me hungry. It keeps me ambitious. It keeps me from kind of from getting too comfortable in the way that I do things. I'm always thinking about how do I reinvent things, and I'm always looking at who else is putting out work and seeing what can I learn from it. Because there are a lot of people who are more naturally talented than me. It's just a fact, but I want to make sure that I'm always putting in the reps. I'm always putting in my hours. I'm always trying to sort of earn my place.
Yes.
And I feel like, I have to hope that like the more that I do this, the more doors will open, the more opportunities will show themselves.
Yes.
But, the moment you get complacent, that's when karma comes out to get you. And so I always want to kind of keep trying new things, and it keeps me from getting bored too. It keeps my mind sharp. And yeah, like I said, I want to do this until they wheel me out.
Mm-hmm.
And by taking kind of these weird esoteric swings, it's not for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been really fortunate that the people who have responded to my work, they've stuck around.
Mm-hmm.
They've promoted my work. They've told their friends to buy it. They've told
Mm-hmm.
their shop to order it. Journalists have covered my work when they certainly didn't have to, especially in a week where 6 future state titles came out, a new
Yeah.
Star Wars book, and Eternals came out.
Yes.
The fact that the honor got the traction that it did is a testament to the fan base that I built.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even, you know what? That is a bad way to phrase it because I didn't build anything. It is the fan base that has so generously kind of come together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I owe it to them
Mm-hmm.
to try my best. I said this in my Twitter thread the other day, is when you buy my book, the thing that I owe you is the story and me telling that story to the absolute best of my abilities.
Yes.
Whether or not you dig the story or whether or not I stuck the landing on it,
Mm-hmm.
it like I said, you do this long enough, even your favorite writer has put out a done.
Yes.
But I feel like as long as I have sort of left it all out on the field,
Mm-hmm.
I like sleeping. So I want to make sure that I can still do that. And so I try really, 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 really hard to make sure that I'm not compromising on the work.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm going to mention to you is that before we get into the fun question is, excuse me, all your jobs has helped you with this.
Sure, absolutely.
The journalism, working especially the PR part, because when I've listened to the other interviews that you've done with John Suntress, I can't remember the other podcast top of my head, is that when you're talking about Scouts Honor, you always had the previews code. You've always gone that extra step to go, hey, when you go to your shop, tell them this code.
Yes.
Because and different creators, have their styles of how to promote their things, and that's their style. But I think yours is one step better because at least you're giving them a preview code. Because if all I remember about Scouts Honor is that, okay, I'm going to go to my comic shop. Was it that Boy Scout comic? And then if the comic shop owner has no idea, they may go to, is it Black Badge from Image?
Yeah, the Lumberjanes.
Yeah.
I mean, first off, thank you for the opportunity for me to alley-oop and say that issue 2's pre-order code is DEC for December 2011-33. But yeah, I mean, this comes from being in the Action Lab trenches. Is that my biggest fear was that our sales would be so low that we'd get canceled. That Diamond would say it's not worth our time to distribute it. And so there's always that little degree of fear where I'm like, I have to have enough sales that Diamond would carry this because otherwise I spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of heartache on a book that no one will see. And I've seen, I won't name names, but I was a little scared straight when I first put out a book because when Spencer and Locke was in previews, there was a book from someone I knew where sales were low enough that the book got canceled. And they only were like an issue or two in. And I was terrified that would be next. And so I always want to leave, like, I always want to keep talking about the book and always trying to get some buzz about it because, yes, failure is not an option in that regard. But yeah, definitely 100%. Every job that I have done has wound up paying off massively down the line and in ways that I never expected. Neil Gaiman used to be a journalist, and he talked about how like being a journalist was like really helpful for him, and how it sort of it made him stop being afraid of word counts and deadlines. And I feel the same way. The way that I would tend to write in a newspaper as well, I write pretty modularly, and so if I have a scene where I'm like, I like this scene, but it doesn't fit here, I kind of sand off the beginning and end, and then I put it somewhere else. And the same way with sequels, as I say, all right, if I have, 8 inches to tell this story, this is what the story would be. But if I happen to have like another like 6, what else would I tell? And it's certainly, yeah, like Neil Gaiman, like, I'm no longer afraid of deadlines, and I'm no longer afraid of like the idea of writing a book can be like kind of daunting when you think like it's a book.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I've written so many articles that like I'm just like, yeah, it's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and what you do. Like I said, I think my job at CBS was huge,
Mm-hmm.
really important for me. Things like, for example, why is The Big Bang Theory, why was it one of the highest rated comedies week after week? It's not like the most sophisticated show out there. I wouldn't even say it's like the best show out there.
Yeah.
But it was super accessible.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they would sort of lead into it, with more established shows until it kind of picked up, had its feet. But the important thing about The Big Bang Theory is you could put if you had your TV on right now and it says next up Big Bang Theory, even if you've never watched an episode, you can watch that and know what's going on. The
Mm-hmm.
bar for accessibility is so low.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that a lot of pop culture takes for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Is that they do the long serialized storytelling, which is great for the diehard fans. It keeps fans invested. But if you don't have like a good entry point for people, it becomes impenetrable. You wouldn't want to start Mr. Robot at season 4, for example. You want to binge that from season 1. And when you do binge it from season 1, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I'm trying to always kind of straddle the, how do I make this as high achieving as it can be, but still make it that like, okay, if you didn't read Spencer and Locke issue 1
Mm-hmm.
and you checked issue 2, you get the gist. And that is something freeing, especially about doing miniseries, is that like, you can still do that. Like, granted, I wouldn't want you to read Grand Theft Asteroid issue 6, but like, if for whatever reason that was the issue you picked up, you could at least follow it. I think so often, especially in serialized storytelling, exposition's hard. It is the biggest pain in the butt. It is one of the single hardest things that I have to write on an issue-to-issue basis, because how do you explain what happened in the last few issues without repeating yourself, without being boring and being like a dumb info dump? And so CBS was really hugely important for me in that regard. And I give it a lot of credit as well. Like the structure of the job gave me a lot of time to kind of like noodle around on ideas, because it was very much a hurry up and wait job. There would be days that I would be like drowning under press releases and drowning under breaking news for all the different shows going on. And other days that it would be like crickets. And I would put out like 2 press releases in a whole day. But that alone was sort of really fertile ground for me saying, all right, do you want to do this or not? Because this is the best time you're going to be able to start. Let's just do it. And sometimes you just have to get restless enough to like move. And CBS, for better or for worse, that's exactly what it did. And even my time as a Hollywood assistant, while I was not there for very long, I was only there for maybe 9 months. That really kind of helped me learn the lay of the land very quickly. Figuring out representation and how that works, figuring out how do things get optioned, building my own connections to Hollywood out here. Has been very helpful for me in terms of adaptations of my work. Things like I can't talk too much about it, but like Spencer and Locke, we're working on an adaptation of that now. And while like I can't talk too much about it because of like NDAs and just the craziness of COVID in Hollywood right now, we would not have been able to get the ball rolling on that project if I didn't live in LA and hadn't met a bunch of people while working as an assistant. And that kind of has helped me, figure out, getting my own representation, for example. Like I'm repped by a manager that I really like. But if I hadn't worked at a management company before that, I wouldn't even have had the vocabulary to do that. I wouldn't have known what a query letter looks like, so all of these things. And this is something that, anybody listening to this who wants to be a comics professional and feels like, it's too late, or I've done all this other stuff. No, I take it from me. It's not true. There were times that I really thought to myself, like, what am I doing here? Like, how is this going to, how am I going to use this at all down the And you know what? I wound up using all of it.
Yes.
Um, and so, my career trajectory was not a straight line. It was definitely a zigzag.
Mm-hmm.
But I almost kind of shudder to think what would have happened if I had just gotten it immediately. I think I would have burned out a long time ago. I would not have been ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you need to spend your time in the wilderness before you're sort of ready to climb the mountain.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to start wrapping things up a little bit. I'm just going to ask you, I'm just going to wrap it up with a couple more questions. Drew
Yeah.
asked, do you have an LCS?
Yeah, I usually split my time between Golden Apple Comics and the Comic Bug. Those are sort of my local stores here in LA, and they've been super supportive of me. But yeah, there's tons of other great shops that have been super supportive. There's Graham Cracker Comics in Chicago. There's Atomic Basement in Long Beach. The Fantasy Shop and Star Clipper in my hometown of St. Louis. Forbidden Planet.
Sorry, David, you're kind of
comics,
it's a bit of a lag.
Mile High Comics,
Okay.
and I Want More Comics. Sorry, yeah, Mile High Comics, and I Want More Comics in the Colorado area. Yeah, just to name a few. But yeah, my local home bases, I usually split between Golden Apple and Comic Book.
Okay, that's pretty cool. What are you currently reading right now?
Oh boy, stuff that I'm reading right now. Jonathan Hickman, the X-Men line. That's gotten me through quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be Jonathan Hickman when I grow up. The data pages actually were a big influence on Scouts Honors back matter.
Okay.
In those books. Al Ewing, is just, he keeps leveling up year after year. Sword is just terrific.
Okay.
And same thing with Immortal Hulk. What else am I reading? Just caught up on Seven Secrets over at Boom. Really liked that. Reading Crossover by Donny Cates over at Image.
That's very good.
Is terrific. Yeah, and then just kind of catching up on some of the older stuff. I was reading Grant Morrison's Batman Inc. Recently. His JLA run, I usually read that annually. It's some of my favorite comics. Those are the ones that are coming to mind right now, but I know I'm going to kick myself later after this interview with a whole bunch of books. Oh, The Autumnal. I forgot about that. Red Fork over at TKO was incredible. Alex Packnadel just killing it over there. G.I. Joe at IDW. Paul Aller's a writer that everybody sleeps on and they shouldn't. Sea of Sorrows by buddy Rich Duke. No Heroin by my friend Frank Gogol over at Source Point. He's got a new book, Dead End Kids, The Suburban Job. I believe that's either coming out soon or Final Order Cutoff is coming up soon. So yeah, just lots of, reading stuff from my friends, but also just kind of like the aspirational figures. And just kind of seeing what I can learn and also just seeing what my buddies are up to.
Oh, okay. All right. And then let's see. Any restaurants you want to promote? Because I know you live in LA. If someone, when all this pandemic is over and they're in LA and go, where can we go in?
Yeah, well, I want to pour one out for El Coyote, which just closed down, just temporarily. They'll be back at some point. 11 City Diner, same thing. I want to shout out my local pizza chain in St. Louis, Emo's Pizza, the Square Beyond Compare. I keep trying to see if they'll sponsor a comic book writer out here in LA. No response yet. But yeah, those are sort of the places. I mean, I don't want to sound like super basic, but like, I wouldn't be able to write all my books without my local Chipotle. I mean, those guys fuel me up every single day, and like they know my dog now. Like they're sweet people. So yeah, that's what I'm going to shout out, the Chipotle on Wilshire. You guys are the real MVPs around here.
And then I know you just got a new puppy.
Yeah, Ruby, she's sweet. Yeah, for those who've been following my social media for a long time, we adopted my parents' dog, my dog's terrier, Holly, right around when Spencer and Locke first came out. And and she passed from
Sorry, David, you're freezing
cancer
up.
shortly before. All right, let's see. I was just saying, we took in my parents' terrier Holly right when Spencer and Locke first came out.
Mm-hmm.
She unfortunately she passed from cancer just before the lockdown. We had taken her through about 9 months of radiation from melanoma, and so it was tough not having a dog through pandemic. But thankfully, we picked up a new dog from San Diego. Her name's Ruby, and she's 4 months old. She's a little Tasmanian devil. She's super sweet, super scrappy, kind of learning the lay of the land. She grew up in a farm in Jabul, California, and now is in a 2-bedroom in LA. But she's very sweet. She's litter box trained, so she's a prodigy. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't bring her on the podcast because she gets very territorial when I do podcasts, and she gets really mad when she sees I'm not paying her attention, and so she starts growling and biting. And but yeah, she's she I needed a writer's assistant. I'm really glad with the one I have now, yeah, she's a sweet pup who gets very, very mad every time I come to the office to do something like this.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, because I follow you on Twitter.
Yeah.
You also have a cat too, right? Do you have a cat?
No, my brothers both do. My brothers both have cats. Out of the triplets, 2 of them now live in Los Angeles. So one of my brothers lives down the street, and he's got a cat named Rocco.
Okay.
My sister is a little bit further south. She does not have a pet. But then my other brother in San Francisco has a cat named Terry. Mm-hmm. So you might have seen photos of that because we brought all of them together for Thanksgiving. Sort of a socially distanced Thanksgiving with all the siblings and all the pets and none of our parents. Terry is my other brother's cat, short for terrified, because he does not like any of us, and he hid under a bed for the entire weekend. No cats for me, but Ruby does have enough litter boxes to make up the difference for sure.
Okay. One last question before I wrap it up, and this question is from John Mail, and I think we've already. I know you already answered it, but I just want to ask it for John is, what is one of your past works you would recommend to a new reader to check out?
If you only read one of my books, Spencer and Locke.
Okay.
That is the book that was my bucket list book. Mm-hmm. That was the book that I didn't know if I'd get to write another comic. So I threw in everything that I knew that that was all I had ever written, I could die happy. Mm-hmm. And I still feel that way. It's still a top selling book for me. I can usually move through about 60 copies in one weekend at every show I do.
Yes.
4 years after it came out. Mm-hmm. If you only pick up one book, pick up Spencer and Locke. But I would just counter that question with, why stop at one? Buy them all. I got a puppy to feed, and kibble don't come cheap. So yes, buy all of them, and maybe buy some for your friends and family, maybe even your enemies. Mm-hmm. Why not? I'm a comics writer. I'll take all the sales I can get.
Let's see. You know what? Let me just go with this other one question from Drew before we finish up. Yeah. It's been a challenging year for everyone, and comics were no exception. Mm-hmm. Do you have any predictions for the comics industry in 2021?
Boy, if I did, I would be a lot richer than I am now. No, I think there's so many variables in the air, just with like the state of the world and, the state of the country. Hopefully we won't have any more COVID-related shutdowns. That I think is kind of like the big concern. I think, the industry has been pretty conservative as far as their acquisitions process since COVID. There's a lot of work that's been bottlenecked, and so they're staggering it all out now. I think more creators are going to go doing stuff on Kickstarter. I certainly will be staying on Kickstarter for the OZ and future projects, just because it's a wonderful community, and it makes the financials of making comics so much more viable. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I think it's anybody's game at this point. I think it depends on how things go over at Marvel and DC. Mm-hmm. How's Future State going to play out over there at DC? What's up with sort of the growing rivalry between Image and Boom is sort of who's going to be supreme in the creator-owned space, but also checking out, sort of the one rung below of the indie scene, which is very vibrant. Places like Aftershock and Vault, and TKO, and Scout, just to name a few places. So I think everybody's kind of figuring out, how do they shake off 2020 as best as they can. And so I don't know if there's going to be any shakeups going on, especially the corporate owned places. There might be more layoffs and that might sort of change the game a little bit. But for me, it's the thing that I said when the pandemic first hit, which is sometimes it's too big. There's only so much that I can navigate. And so I can tell you, for me in 2021, it's, I'm going to be I'm going to be writing more books. I'm going to be pitching as many places as I can. I'm going to be doing more anthologies. I'm going to be doing more Kickstarter campaigns. The OZ will return probably in March. The Hunt for the Silver Slippers. So that'll be a really exciting second installment, double sized, just like the first one. But other than that, I'm just excited to, see my friends, getting more work. Paul Aller with Hollow Heart, my pal Danny Lore just was named writer on Champions over at Marvel. Super well deserved. Rich Duke with Sea of Sorrows, just killing it. So yeah, I'm really thrilled, with seeing my friends succeed. I'm feeling like, I'm part of a certain class of comics people, and watching them kind of ascend has been really satisfying to watch. But yeah, no, I wish I had my crystal ball. Boy, it'd make this a whole lot easier. I think for 2021, it's just going to be grit my teeth and ride it out, and just hope people respond to Scout's Honor. Hope people respond to my next few projects coming down the line. And beyond that, just keep writing everything like it's my last.
David, thank you very much. Before we wrap up, where can people follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Pepose D. It's my last name, first initial, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can visit my website, davidpepose.com, or you can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews.
Okay. All right. David, again, I'm going to say, mahalo. Thank you for your time. That was my interview with David Pepose, the writer of Scout's Honor from Aftershock Comics. I want to give a big mahalo to David. David, thank you very much for your time to sit and talk with me about not only some of your past works like Spencer and Locke, but also too about your new comic Scout's Honor. Scout's Honor #1 just came out recently last week. If it's still at your LCS, I encourage you to pick up Scout's Honor #1. I've read the first issue. I love it. There's so many layers in this post-apocalyptic story, and that's what I love about it. Scout's Honor #2 comes out on February 10th. Scout's Honor #3 comes out on March 10th, and the preview code for that one is JAN as in Nancy 211049. Again, the previews code for that one is JAN as in Nancy 211049. So if you already pick up the first issue and you want to continue reading on this mini series, that's the previews code for the to order for the issue #3. As I'm wrapping this episode up, I want to give a few shout outs to a few people that helped put together this special episode. The first big shout out is to John Mayo. John from the Comic Book Page podcast, thank you very much for helping me to do a Zoom test run to make sure that I'm doing everything correct and so forth, all the little technical details. So John, thank you very much. I also want to thank Kyle and Drew for letting me contribute to your podcast. Thank you very much, guys. And thank you very much, Drew. Drew is the co-host of Comics for Fun and Profit. Drew, thank you very much. You're the one that's doing all the heavy lifting of, cleaning the audio, putting the episode together. So Drew, thank you very much. If you are a new listener to the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast, new episodes are released every Saturday. So, I encourage you to please, check out this podcast every Saturday. It's a lot of fun. I really like it. Again, it's all about fun, and it talks about the love for comics. And lastly, I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for tuning in. Until next time, guys, aloha.